Hello, everyone. Welcome to the seventh episode of Truth Tracker, a podcast dedicated to combating misinformation in various political topics within the United States of America. First off, thank you so much for tuning into the seventh episode. I really appreciate everyone's support as we start this podcast up and get it up and running and expand it to a wide range of viewers. I really appreciate that, and thank you so much for tuning in, liking this video, subscribing, turning on post notifications. I really appreciate it. Today's episode, we are going to be tackling misinformation within the U.S. economy, and so this episode is going to work pretty similar to the episodes in the past, as we're just going to be busting 10 myths regarding the U.S. economy, as well as having our weekly civic engagement segment that we do with every episode. So before we continue with the episode, I would just like to ask everyone if they could like this episode, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications if they haven't. And we'll give them a couple seconds right now to do that. That way you'll know whenever our new episodes come out weekly. Awesome. And so, yeah, that being said, there's no new announcements on my end. We're just going to keep on doing what we do here at Truth Tracker. And so with that being said, let's get into the seventh episode of Truth Tracker, which is going to be about the U.S. economy. So our first myth today is that higher taxes always hurt economic growth. Now, the impact of taxes actually on economic growth is very nuanced, because while it's true that higher taxes can lower incentives for work and investment, they also help fund essential public goods and services that contribute to economic productivity in our country. Furthermore, taxes enable government investment in infrastructure, education, and healthcare, which can boost long-term economic growth. For example, if you look at well-funded public schools and universities, they often help enhance human capital and lead to a more skilled workforce in our country. Furthermore, well-maintained infrastructure reduces business costs as well, and helps increases economic efficiency. And there's actually been research done that shows that the relationship between taxes and growth isn't this sort of straightforward and consistent and linear relationship. And there's actually many cases where higher taxes can coexist with a strong economic performance if the revenue is used collectively. So at the end of the day, higher taxes do not always hurt economic growth. There are many scenarios where higher taxes actually do benefit economic growth. And we got this information from the Tax Policy Center. Our next myth is that the minimum wage increases unemployment. Now, the effect of minimum wage increases on employment levels is a subject, first off, of very, extensive research and a large debate. The current conventional economic thought suggests that raising the minimum wage actually may lead to higher unemployment among low-skilled workers. However, that was the sort of past conventional thought. But new and innovative evidence often shows that there is a higher minimum wage actually lowers unemployment. Several studies have demonstrated that moderate increases in the minimum wage do not lead to significant job losses. In fact, they actually can help boost worker productivity, reduce turnover, and which potentially leads to positive outcomes for businesses, as well as decreased unemployment within our country. Furthermore, higher minimum wages can increase the workers' purchasing power, which can stimulate demand, and as well as create jobs in other sectors, which can help decrease unemployment across the country. And so at the end of the day, this myth is simply not true. Minimum wage does not increase unemployment, as very simply, at the end of the day, there's new innovative studies that have come out and shown that the minimum wage actually does not have any effect on the unemployment rate within the United States of America. And we got this information from the Institute for Research on Labor and Employment. Our next myth is that cutting taxes always leads to economic growth. Now, the belief that cutting taxes will inevitably result in significant economic growth sort of oversimplifies this complex and very intricate relationship between tax policy and economic growth and performance. For example, while tax cuts can stimulate economic activity by increasing disposable income and, incentivizing investment, their effect can vary depending on a number of factors, including the overall fiscal environment, Furthermore, such as well as how cuts are structured. Sorry. Furthermore, the impact of tax cuts on economic growth depends on how the resulting changes in the revenue resulting from government spending as well as taxes. Um, Furthermore, for example, if tax cuts, for example, lead to a higher deficit without corresponding spending cuts, there actually may be a result in increased borrowing costs or reduced government investment in essential services. Conversely, however, well-targeted tax cuts that boost business investment or consumer spending can actually, uh, you know, spur growth. Additionally, the long-term effects of tax cuts influenced by how they interact with other policies and conditions are often unknown. And so at the end of the day, the belief that cutting taxes are always gonna, result in significant economic growth is just simply not true, as it sort of dumbs down the relationship and does not fail to address many of the intricacies within the relationship. So therefore this myth is not true, as there's also been many studies that shown that cutting taxes at certain times actually leads to economic downturn and bad economic conditions. So at the end of the day, this myth is not true. Cutting taxes does not always lead to economic growth. Our next myth is that the U.S. economy is always in decline or stagnation. The U.S. economy, so first off, actually, many economies, the major economic cycles are that they go through cycles of growth and recession, but the long-term trend throughout the past couple of years has been that the U.S. economy is actually moving upward. Economic performance can be influenced by, first off, various factors such as technological innovation, demographic changes, and policy decisions. For example, historical data shows that despite experiencing certain recessions like in 2008 and during the COVID-19 pandemic, the U.S. economy has generally grown over the long term. There are certain economic expansions or economic expansion in general can be interrupted by downturns, such as the economic downfall during the COVID-19 pandemic, but the overall trajectory has been positive within our country. Um, for example, after the Great Expression, we experienced a prolonged period of economic expansion, which is marked by job creation and increased consumer spending. So at the end of the day, this sort of notion that the economy is always in decline or stagnation is not true. We've actually been booming in the long term. So at the end of the day, this myth is not true. The U.S. is not always in decline or stagnation, and is actually currently expanding and is in a great condition. Our next myth is that free trade always harms domestic jobs. Now, this myth, at the end of the day, is simply not true. Even though there is a certain notion that free trade can lead to job losses in specific industries, it actually also creates opportunities in other industries. For example, the overall impact on employment depends on how economies adjust to changes in trade patterns, as well as how workers transition to new roles that result from free trade. Furthermore, free trade helps open up new markets for exports, and it actually helps lead to economic efficiency as well as lower consumer prices. So, furthermore, um, even though there may be certain jobs that are shipped overseas due to trade, there are actually many sectors that do benefit from a increase in economic efficiency as well as job growth. So the overall net increase, there's overall a net increase in jobs within our country. Furthermore, there have been certain policies enacted, such as NAFTA, which is a free trade agreement among the North American continent, which has led to job shifts, or has led to job growth, and also created it has led to job shifts towards or jobs moving overseas, but in fact has also created opportunities in export-oriented industries, and actually in the long term has resulted in more domestic jobs. So at the end of the day, free trade does not harm domestic jobs, and there are actually many scenarios where it helps boost domestic jobs. And we got this information from the Peterson Institute for International Economics. And so I guess the pattern that you can see with all these past 5 minutes is that we've been using, very credible and very accurate and correct sort of economic sources. And this provides us accurate information that we can use to bust these myths. And so the information that we're providing is very accurate and from reliable sources. Our next myth is that corporate tax cuts always lead to increased investment and higher wages. Now, while corporate tax cuts can incentivize investment, their effects on wages and investment levels are not guaranteed. For example, businesses may choose to use tax savings for stock buybacks, dividends, or other purposes that they choose to rather than increasing wages or investing in new projects. As research has shown, sort of these mixed results regarding the impacts of corporate tax cuts on wages and investments. For instance, the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was enacted during the Trump presidency, led to significant corporate tax savings, but the expected wage increases and investment boosts among the wide scale of Americans were not uniformly observed. Instead, some companies use tax the savings for shareholder returns rather than benefiting their entire company. So, at the end of the day, most corporate tax cuts do not actually always lead to increased investments and higher wages. And we got this information from the Economic Policy Institute. So at the end of the day, this sort of notion that these tax cuts always lead to increased investment and better economic conditions for the companies through wages is just simply not true. As there have been scenarios where corporate tax cuts have actually led to increased economic inequality. Our next myth is that inflation is always caused by too much money in the economy. Now, it's true that, for example, currently, while excessive money supply can contribute to inflation, other factors such as supply chain disruption, cost push factors, as well as changes in demand can also drive inflation. Furthermore, we're going along with that, for example, supply chain issues such as those seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, which kind of destroyed supply chains across the world, can cause shortages and drive up prices and therefore help increase inflation. Furthermore, inflation can also be influenced by increased production costs, such as rising wages or commodity prices. The relationship between money supply and inflation is also more complex than the simple quantity theory suggests. So therefore, at the end of the day, this sort of idea, this very simple and very basic idea that inflation is caused by too much money in the economy is not true, as there are many factors that cause inflation. Our next myth is that the U.S. has the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Now, although the U.S. has a very high statutory corporate tax rate, the effective tax rate, which is what companies actually pay, it can actually be lower due to tax laundering, deductions, credits, and loopholes. Now, our tax rate is high compared to other countries' tax rates, but the effective tax rate, which takes into account various tax breaks and whatnot, is actually lower, as many countries offer extensive deductions and incentives that lower their effective rates significantly. Furthermore, many policies that we've enacted offer extensive deductions and incentives that have lowered our tax effective rates significantly. Furthermore, as you mentioned previously, the U.S. Tax Cuts and Jobs Acts actually reduced the statutory rate, but the effective rate had already been lowered due to various tax planning strategies and loopholes. And we got this information from the OECD. And we also got various resources from the past couple of minutes from the Brookings Institution, as well as the Federal Reserve Bank from St. Louis. So at the end of the day, this sort of idea that the U.S. has the highest corporate tax rate is actually proven to be not true, as this myth is not true, and as there's many underlying ideas within the idea that the U.S. has the highest corporate tax rate. Our next myth is that higher government spending always leads to higher inflation. Now, the idea that increased revenues being collected by the government and increased government spending will inevitably cause higher inflation sort of oversimplifies the relationship between fiscal policy and price levels and inflation and the cost of living. The impact of government spending on inflation depends on, first off, a various amount of factors such as the state of the economy, economic disturbances, as well as how the spending is financed. At the end of the day, government spending can influence inflation, but its effects are contingent on the economy's capacity to absorb additional demand. For example, if there's a certain recession going on, increased spending might actually stimulate growth without causing much inflation. And so therefore, this sort of idea that high government spending always leads to higher inflation is just simply not true at the end of the day, as there's many research that proves that there's at certain moments government spending actually helps boost economic growth and not higher inflation. And so at the end of the day, this myth is not true. There are many scenarios where higher government spending actually does not lead to high inflation, and in fact helps boost the economic conditions within this country. And we got this information from the Brookings Institution. Our final myth for today is that increasing government spending always leads to higher deficits. Now, increased government spending through actually does not necessarily lead to higher deficits if it is offset by increased revenue or economic growth. And so, therefore, the impact on the deficit depends on how spending is financed, as well as the overall fiscal strategy, as increased government spending can stimulate economic activity, which in turn can potentially lead to higher revenues through increased economic growth. For example, if spending is directed towards productive investments such as infrastructure or education or healthcare policy, it can boost economic output and offset some of the fiscal costs. And this can actually lead to lower deficits within our government and our federal budget. And so at the end of the day, this myth is not true. Increased government spending does not always lead to higher deficits, and in certain scenarios can actually help lower deficits. And we got this information from the Brookings Institution. And that is it for today's myths. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and sticking around for this episode. If you have not yet, just again, urge everyone to just make sure to first off like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications. That way, you are notified and fully engaged in this channel. And now we'll move on into our civic engagement segment for today. And so, like we've been saying the last couple of episodes, as the 2024 election comes up, it's super important that everyone gets out and gets out and votes. No matter what you believe, for example, in economic policy and in the way the economy should be treated in this country, and whichever economic beliefs you have, it's important that you exercise your right to vote, as it's super important in this country. Many people have given their lives for us to have the ability to exercise one of our natural rights within that the Constitution provides us, which is the right to vote. So therefore, at the end of the day, we owe it to everyone that gave our lives for our country to help to vote and make sure that we're civically engaged. Furthermore, it helps us hold our elected officials accountable and help us advocate for local change in our communities. And so at the end of the day, this voting, just being civically engaged and volunteering on political campaigns and just being engaged in your local community through political activities is super important, as it allows you to really create the sort of change that you want to bring to your communities. And so again, I would highly encourage everyone to vote in the 2024 election. It's super important, and make sure you use your vote, use your voice, as your voice matters. Please reach out, comment on this channel if you have any questions regarding voting. It's super important, like we say again. It helps you bring local change in your communities, and it really makes you feel like you contribute to America and that you have a certain voice. And with that being said, that is it for today, everyone. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you so much for all the support, from liking, subscribing, and turning on post notifications. I really appreciate it. Make sure to comment below any thoughts you have on this episode and your belief on the U.S. economy. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching, everyone. Have a great day.